Daniel had always thought of himself as adaptable. As a human researcher stationed on Zerath 7, an alien planet filled with towering silver-leaf trees and bioluminescent rivers, he was used to strange customs. But nothing could have prepared him for this. It all started during a grand festival hosted by the Sci-Fi, the dominant species of the planet. The Sci-Fi were a proud warrior-like race, their bodies tall and powerful, covered in faint iridescent patterns that shifted with their emotions. Among them was Elvira, a strikingly beautiful Sci-Fi woman known for her sharp wit and mischievous nature. Daniel had met her a few weeks ago, and ever since, she had made it her personal mission to tease him every chance she got. He didn't mind. In fact, he found her amusing, even if half the time he didn't understand her cultural humor. During the festival, Elvira approached him with a glint in her violet eyes. In her hands, she held a small ceremonial trinket, a delicate piece of metal with intricate carvings that shimmered in the starlight. With a dramatic smirk, she held it out to him and said, "Daniel, I offer you this. Will you accept?" Daniel, always up for a joke, chuckled. "Sure, why not?" He took the trinket without hesitation. The moment he did, the crowd around them gasped. A few warriors whispered among themselves. Some elders raised their brows in shock. Elvira, on the other hand, froze. Daniel blinked. Did I do something wrong?" Elvira stared at him, then at the trinket in his hand. Her mouth twitched. Was that panic on her face? No, impossible. Elvira never panicked. Then she burst out laughing, clutching her stomach. "Oh, this is rich," she wheezed. "You have no idea what you just did, do you?" Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I just played along with your joke." She grinned, but there was something different about her expression now, something almost nervous. "Daniel, my dear human friend, you just accepted my proposal." Daniel's brain stopped. "Wait, what?" She gestured at the trinket in his hand. "That is a traditional Sci-Fi engagement token. By accepting it, you have agreed to bond with me. For life." Daniel almost dropped the trinket. "You're kidding." She winked. "Am I?" The surrounding Sci-Fi watched with interest, some murmuring approvingly, others shaking their heads. The elders nodded solemnly, as if something sacred had just taken place. Daniel gulped. "Okay. Let's just take a step back here. This is a joke, right?" Elvira's smirk softened slightly. "Well, it was at first. But now," she leaned closer, whispering in his ear, "now, it's very, very real." Daniel felt the weight of 1,000 alien traditions crash down on him. He had walked into this without a second thought. Now he was accidentally engaged to an alien warrior princess, and by the look in her eyes, she was enjoying every second of his shock. Daniel stood frozen, gripping the small ceremonial trinket in his hand. His brain was still processing what Elvira had just said. Engaged. For life. He looked at the crowd of Sci-Fi, their glowing eyes filled with curiosity and approval. Some of them nodded respectfully, while others exchanged quiet murmurs. The elders looked the most pleased, as if something sacred had just been confirmed. Daniel cleared his throat. "Okay, Elvira. Funny joke. You got me. Now tell everyone the truth so we can all have a good laugh." Elvira crossed her arms, her golden tattoos shifting slightly in color. "Oh, Daniel, I wish I could, but..." She tilted her head, her smirk returning. "It's already done." His stomach dropped. Done. He looked down at the trinket in his hand as if it would suddenly explain everything. "I didn't sign any papers. I didn't agree to anything serious." Elvira raised a brow. "You accepted the token. That is enough." Daniel let out a nervous laugh. "That's insane. What if I didn't know what it meant?" One of the older Sci-Fi, a dignified elder with dark blue skin and sharp silver eyes, stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. Ignorance does not change the pact, human. You have accepted her offer. The bond is recognized. Daniel's heart pounded. He turned back to Exalvera. Come on, help me out here. She grinned playfully. You're the one who took it, Daniel. And you did it so confidently, too. I'm quite flattered. Daniel groaned. There has to be a way out of this. The elder spoke again. If you wish to break the bond, you must go through the trial of rejection. Daniel perked up. Okay, that sounds like a great idea. What's the trial? Zalvera's smirk grew wider. Oh, it's simple. You just have to prove you're unworthy of me, in front of the entire Sci-Fi Council. Daniel blinked. Ha. The elder nodded. The trial will test your strength, intelligence, and character. If you fail, the bond will be severed. Daniel sighed in relief. All right. Sounds fair. Then Zalvera added with a mischievous glint in her eyes. But if you pass, then the bond is final. Daniel's stomach twisted. Wait, what? Zalvera patted his shoulder. Relax, human. You wanted an easy way out, right? I'm sure you'll fail spectacularly. The crowd chuckled, enjoying the situation far too much. Daniel stared at the alien woman who just turned his life upside down. She was clearly having way too much fun with this. He took a deep breath. Fine. Let's do this trial. Zalvera grinned, stepping closer. Good. This will be fun. Daniel had a bad feeling about what was coming next. Daniel stood at the center of the Sci-Fi arena, his heart pounding as the massive crowd watched in silent anticipation. The vast, open space was surrounded by towering stone pillars, and the air was thick with the tension of an ancient ritual. To Daniel, it felt like every eye on the planet was on him. He had never felt so out of place. Across from him stood Exalvera, her arms crossed, a mischievous smile dancing on her lips. Her stance was confident, almost playful. It was as if she was daring him to take on the challenge she had set up for him. And in a way she was. So, what exactly do I have to do to fail this trial? Daniel asked, trying to make light of the situation. Do I have to wrestle a wild beast? Solve a complicated puzzle? Or maybe I need to impress the elders with my dance moves? Zalvera raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by his attempt to lighten the mood. No, Daniel. The trial is simple. You will face a series of challenges that will test your ability to adapt to Sci-Fi ways. Strength, strategy, and endurance. Each test will get more difficult, and if you fail even one, the bond will be broken. Daniel nodded, trying to steady his nerves. The whole situation felt like a cruel joke, but he couldn't back out now. He had already agreed to this absurd bond, and now, it seemed, he had to prove his worth. The first challenge was a strength test. The Sci-Fi elders stood at the edge of the arena, watching closely, their faces impassive. In front of Daniel was a large stone pillar with a thick rope attached to it. The task was simple: pull the pillar with all his strength. Sounds easy enough, but as Daniel grabbed the rope, he quickly realized that the pillar weighed several tons. He pulled with all his might, but it barely budged. The crowd murmured, and Daniel's muscles burned. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and for a moment, he thought he was going to collapse. Come on, Daniel. Exalvera called from the sidelines. I thought humans were supposed to be strong. He gritted his teeth, determined to prove her wrong. His hand slipped on the rope, but he didn't give up. He adjusted his grip, focused on his breathing, and then, using his legs for leverage, he gave one final, desperate pull. The pillar shifted, just slightly at first, then with a loud groan, it slowly started moving. The crowd roared with approval, and Daniel collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. He had done it. He had passed the first test, but barely. Zalvera gave him an amused nod, clearly impressed. Well done, human. You're stronger than I thought. But let's see if you can handle the next one. Daniel didn't have time to recover. The second challenge was already being set up. This time, A large, complicated puzzle was brought to him, made of glowing stones that needed to be aligned in a specific pattern. It was designed to test his strategic thinking and problem-solving skills. Daniel took a deep breath and began working on the puzzle. It wasn't as physically demanding as the last test, but it was just as mentally draining. As he worked, he could feel the eyes of the Sci-Fi on him, waiting to see if he would succeed or fail miserably. He focused all his attention on the puzzle, trying not to let the pressure get to him. After what felt like an eternity, he placed the final stone into place, and the puzzle lit up in a brilliant flash of color. The crowd erupted in cheers. He had done it. He had passed the second challenge. Zalvara's eyes gleamed, clearly impressed, though she still held that playful smirk. "Not bad, human," she said, "but this next test will push you to your limits." Daniel's stomach churned. If the first two tests were this intense, he couldn't imagine what the next one would be like. And yet there was something in Zalvara's tone that made him think she wasn't just testing him. She was starting to believe in him. For the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as out of his depth as he had thought. The heat in the chamber had become unbearable, a thick, suffocating wall of air pressing against Darren's chest. Sweat streamed down his face, his muscles aching with every movement. His skin felt like it was burning, but still, he stood firm. He refused to fall. From above, Soraya watched with a mixture of awe and growing concern. The trial was meant to break him, to prove once and for all that a human could never withstand what Xelari could endure. And yet, Darren was still standing. He had already passed the first trial, his victory over the Revok beast, a shock to everyone. And now, as the hours passed in the heat chamber, he was proving something even more astonishing. The humans could endure pain and suffering in ways that the Xelari had never thought possible. Soraya's mind raced. The trial was a test of endurance, but it was also a test of will. It wasn't just about surviving the physical pain. It was about the strength of character that Darren was displaying. She had expected him to fall, to crumble beneath the heat and pressure. But he didn't. She had seen hundreds of Xelari warriors fail this trial. Their bodies, stronger than any humans, had not been enough to survive the intensity of the chamber. But Darren was something different. Soraya stood from her seat, her gaze locked on the figure in the chamber below. What was it about him? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see the king, his face grim. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority. "This human should have perished by now," King Valor muttered. "Why has he not fallen?" Soraya didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on Darren, who was now pushing through the fourth hour of the trial. His movements were slower, his body clearly weakening, but still, he refused to drop to his knees. "He's not like the others," Soraya said softly. "He's more resilient." The king's gaze shifted to her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Are you questioning our trials, princess?" Soraya straightened, but there was no anger in her response, only a quiet respect that she hadn't expected to feel for this human. "No, your majesty. I am simply observing." The king turned his attention back to Darren. "This trial was meant to prove that humans do not belong in our world. But it seems we were mistaken." Soraya didn't respond, but her mind was racing. She had grown up learning the ways of the Xelari, respecting their strength, their traditions. She had always believed that their superiority was unquestionable. But now, Darren was changing everything. He was showing her that strength didn't always come from muscle or bloodlines. It came from the will to keep fighting when everything seemed impossible. As the hours dragged on, Soraya felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just about the trial anymore. It was about Darren himself. Her feelings, once dismissed as curiosity, were starting to feel like something deeper. And for the first time, Soraya wasn't sure what to do with it. As Darren took another labored step forward, his eyes locked on the ceiling, his gaze never leaving the image of Soraya watching him from above. In that moment, Their worlds collided. Darren's heart was pounding in his chest, his breath shallow and ragged. He had made it through 4 hours in the heat chamber, but now the end was in sight. The final hour loomed ahead, and his body felt like it was ready to give up. His skin was burned, his legs weak, and every breath he took felt like fire in his lungs. But still, he refused to fall. His thoughts were focused on the end. Just 1 more hour, and he would be free. Or so he thought. From the viewing chamber above, Soraya watched him with an intensity she hadn't expected. She could see the exhaustion in his movements, the pain etched across his face, but there was also something else, something that set him apart from every warrior she had ever known. Determination, courage. And then, the sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Torek, a high-ranking Xilari warrior, approaching with a smug expression. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated the confidence of someone who had never lost a challenge. "So the human survives," Torek said, his voice laced with contempt. "I can't say I'm surprised. You've been watching him closely, haven't you, Princess?" Soraya didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure how to answer. Something in her chest tightened at the mention of Darren, but she couldn't deny the truth in Torek's words. She had been watching him, not just out of curiosity, but out of something deeper, something that confused her. "This trial is for Xilari warriors," Torek continued, his eyes narrowing. "Not humans. He should not be allowed to complete it. It is an insult to our honor." Soraya glanced at Darren, who was still standing tall, his body swaying slightly with exhaustion. "He's not like other humans," she said, her voice softer than she meant it to be. "He deserves to finish." Torek snorted in disbelief. "Deserves? You're allowing this weakling to win just because you feel sorry for him." Soraya's eyes flashed with a rare, sharp anger. "It's not pity," she said firmly. "It's respect." Torek looked at her for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. "Respect? What will he do after this? When his trial is over, he'll go back to being a human, weak and frail. He'll never be one of us, never be good enough." His words stung, but Soraya didn't back down. She had always respected the Xilari code: strength, honor, pride, but something in her had begun to question that. Darren wasn't like the other humans. He was proving something important here, and she wasn't ready to let that be destroyed by old traditions. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "This isn't about being human or Xilari. It's about something more, something I can't explain yet." Torek's face twisted in a sneer, but he said nothing more. He knew the conversation was over, but something in him had changed as well. The respect Soraya was giving the human was more than he could ignore. As Soraya turned her attention back to Darren, she saw his strength faltering. His legs were giving out, and he was barely staying on his feet. The heat was overwhelming, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. "Come on, Darren," Soraya whispered under her breath. "You can do this." But just as she said that, a loud crash echoed through the chamber. Torek had thrown a heavy stone onto the floor in a deliberate attempt to distract Darren. The impact was enough to make the human stumble, his knees buckling. "He's done," Torek said with a grin. "He doesn't belong here." Soraya's heart raced. She couldn't let Darren fail now, not after everything he had proven. She knew this trial was supposed to be a test of his endurance, but she also knew something else. This was about more than just strength. It was about honor, and she wasn't about to let him fall at the final hurdle. "No," she said softly, her voice stronger now. "Not yet." The fight was not over. Darren's legs gave way beneath him. His body was at its breaking point, every muscle screaming in agony, every breath an effort. He had barely kept his footing after the stone crashed to the floor, his mind growing clouded from the heat and exhaustion. The harsh temperatures pressed down like a heavy weight, and his vision blurred. But still, he didn't give up. He barely caught his breath when he felt a shadow fall over him, followed by a soft voice. "Get up, human." It was Xalvira's voice, clear, and commanding. Darren's vision cleared just enough to see her standing at the edge of the chamber, her figure bathed in the soft, glowing light. Her usual smirk was gone, replaced by something different, something he couldn't place, but it was real. "You can't stay down," she said again, stepping closer. Her words didn't just fuel his will to stand. They gave him a reason to fight. Every part of him wanted to collapse, wanted to surrender to the overwhelming heat and pressure. But her voice, her confidence, sparked something in him. With a grunt of effort, Darren pushed himself upright. His hands trembled, but his body moved despite the pain. "I'm not done yet," he muttered to himself. But in truth, it wasn't just the trial that pushed him forward. It was something else. It was the growing respect he felt for the HFY, and strangely, for her. The fire in his chest wasn't just from the heat anymore. It was from the thought of her watching him. He had been told his entire life that humans were weak, that they couldn't endure, couldn't survive in alien worlds. But in this moment he realized something profound. He had the strength to survive because of the people around him. The people like Zalvira, who believed in him even when he doubted himself. Zalvira's eyes never left him as he took slow, painful steps forward. Her usual teasing nature was gone, replaced with an intensity that he hadn't seen before. For the first time, he wondered if she truly cared whether he passed this trial or not. He struggled forward, the last hours still stretching before him. But with every step, his resolve grew stronger. He could feel the sting of the heat, but he ignored it. Instead, he focused on his legs, on the way his feet met the ground. Darren could hear the whispers from the HFY watching from above. Their voices were filled with doubt, but in the midst of all of them, one voice stood out. "This human is strong," a deep voice said. It was the king himself, his tone filled with something new, respect. Darren fought the urge to smile. The king had acknowledged him, even in the most challenging of moments. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. Soraya's eyes followed Darren, her gaze unwavering. She watched him from the shadows, her thoughts turning over in her mind. For so long, she had believed in the strength of her people, in the glory of her heritage. But now she saw something in him, something that made her question everything she had been taught. Was it possible? Could a human truly match the strength of the HFY, not just in muscle, but in heart and mind? And if so, what did that mean for her people? She didn't have an answer. But in that moment, she realized she didn't need one. She could no longer simply watch from the sidelines, disconnected. She was beginning to understand the true meaning of partnership, not the cold, calculated alliances of politics, but something far deeper, something that grew from mutual respect and trust. The bond that was forming between them wasn't just one of tradition. It was something new, something unique. Darren's struggle was hers too. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could suffocate you. Daniel stood in the center of the arena, his chest rising and falling with quick breaths. His muscles still ached from the previous trials, but there was no time to rest. Today was the final test, the one that would decide his fate among the Sci-Fi. He could feel the eyes of the entire planet on him. And it wasn't just Zalvira who was watching. Torek was here too, standing in the shadows, his gaze cold and calculating. "Are you ready, human?" Zalvira's voice cut through the silence, sharp but not unkind. She had been by his side throughout the trials, but today was different. Today, she wouldn't be standing at the sidelines. She was part of this challenge, and she knew what was at stake. Daniel nodded, pushing away the lingering doubts in his mind. "I'm ready." The words felt like a promise he had to keep. The arena floor shifted, and suddenly, the ground rumbled beneath his feet. The sound of heavy, dragging steps reached his ears, and he instinctively braced himself. From the shadows, a massive figure emerged, a T-core beast, a creature that had been trained to fight and kill. Its reptilian eyes glowed an eerie yellow, and its massive body slithered across the floor with terrifying speed. The creature's sharp claws scraped against the ground as it drew closer, its jaws snapping open with a deep guttural growl. Zalvera stepped back, her eyes fixed on Daniel. This is the trial. You must survive against the T-Core beast. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. This was real. There was no escaping now. The creature was over twice his size, and its muscles rippled with strength. It moved like a shadow, faster than any human could keep up with. How do I fight something like this? Daniel muttered to himself, sweat already beginning to form on his forehead. Zalvera's voice came from behind him, cool and calm. You don't fight it head-on. You'll need to use your wits. Think like a predator. Daniel nodded, scanning the arena for anything that could help. His mind raced as the beast slowly circled, waiting for its moment to strike. He couldn't take it down with brute force. That much was clear. But there had to be another way. The creature lunged. Daniel barely had time to dodge, rolling to the side just as its claws scraped through the air, where he'd been standing seconds before. His heart raced, but he didn't stop moving. Every instinct screamed at him to survive, to outsmart this beast. He had to find something to use. His eyes flicked around the arena, and then he saw it, a pile of jagged rocks scattered at the far end. If he could get the creature there, he might be able to use the environment to his advantage. Move, move. Daniel urged himself, running toward the rocks as fast as his legs would carry him. The T-Core beast followed, its growls growing louder, but Daniel was faster. He reached the pile, turning just in time to grab a sharp stone. With a quick spin, Daniel hurled the rock with all his might at the beast's glowing eye. The creature howled in pain, momentarily disoriented. This was his chance. He sprinted toward the creature's exposed side, grabbing another rock and throwing it with precision. The T-Core beast staggered back, disoriented and angry, but it wasn't down. Not yet. Daniel breathed heavily, watching the beast carefully. He couldn't afford another mistake. This time, he needed to trap it. He spotted a narrow gap between two large rocks. If he could lure the creature there, he might be able to trap it. With a quick burst of energy, Daniel dodged another attack and sprinted toward the gap. The T-Core beast followed, but this time it was too slow. The gap was narrow, and as the beast tried to follow, its massive body got stuck. Daniel didn't waste a second. He grabbed another stone, throwing it at the creature's head to disorient it even more. The T-Core beast thrashed in the gap, but it couldn't free itself. Now, Daniel shouted, his voice hoarse. He had done it. The creature was trapped. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices filling the arena as Daniel stood there, panting and covered in sweat. He had done the impossible. He had survived. Zalvera approached him, a look of genuine admiration in her eyes. You did it, human, she said softly. You've earned your place among us. Daniel looked at her, his heart racing, not from the fight, but from the connection that was growing between them. This trial wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that he belonged, that he could stand alongside the Sci-Fi as an equal. And in that moment, he realized something else. He wasn't just fighting for the bond anymore. He was fighting for her, for the relationship that had begun as a joke, but had slowly turned into something much deeper. The fight was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. The cheers of the Sci-Fi echoed through the arena, but Daniel barely heard them. His mind was still racing, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had survived the trial. He had outsmarted the T-Core beast and proven himself worthy. But as he stood there, covered in sweat and dirt, a sense of uncertainty still lingered. He had passed the trials, yes. But what now? He had never expected any of this. This bond with Zalvera, this strange connection that had grown between them over the past weeks. It had started as a joke, a playful gesture. But now it felt like something more, something real. Zalvera approached him slowly, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. There was no smirk this time, no teasing glint in her eyes. Instead, her expression was serious, almost contemplative. For a moment, they just stood there, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on them. The crowd's cheers faded into the background as Daniel focused on her, trying to read her expression. "You did it," Zalvira said softly, her voice quieter than usual. "You survived. And more than that, you showed us all that humans are capable of, things we never imagined." Daniel gave a small, weary smile. "I couldn't have done it without the training you gave me." She shook her head slightly, her lips curving into a small smile. "It wasn't just training, Daniel. It was you. You have something that none of us expected. A spirit, a determination that isn't common, even among the Sci-Fi." Daniel felt a warmth in his chest at her words, but it was followed by a wave of confusion. He had always thought he was just a human trying to fit in, trying to survive in a world that didn't belong to him. But now, as he stood in front of Zalvira, he realized that maybe he wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe he was becoming a part of something bigger, something he hadn't anticipated. Zalvira took a step closer, her gaze softening as she reached out and touched his arm lightly. "The bond has already been formed, Daniel," she said, her voice gentle, but filled with certainty. "You've proven yourself in ways I never thought possible. And now, it's not just a bond of duty. It's something that belongs to both of us." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected this, to hear those words, to feel this sense of connection with her. It was more than just surviving the trials. It was about building something real, something true. For a moment, he wondered if he was ready for it. A bond with someone like Zalvira, with the Sci-Fi. It wasn't just about the two of them. It was about two worlds coming together, two cultures that had never truly understood each other, now woven together in a way that couldn't be undone. "I didn't come here looking for this," Daniel said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what to expect. But now that I'm here, with you, I can't imagine walking away." Zalvira's eyes softened, her hand still resting on his arm. She looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. Not just a human, not just a competitor, but someone who had truly earned a place by her side. "Then stay," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "Stay, not because you have to, but because you want to." Daniel looked into her eyes, and for the first time since he had arrived on Zereth 7, he realized that the life he had once known felt like a distant memory. This place, these people, and most importantly, her had become his world. He nodded slowly, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just relief. It wasn't just satisfaction. It was a deeper feeling, something that transcended the trials, the tests, and the obstacles they had both overcome. It was love, a love that had grown between them, quietly, unexpectedly, but with undeniable strength. "I'm staying," Daniel said finally, his voice steady. "I'm staying for you." Zalvira smiled, her eyes filled with something that made Daniel's heart race. "Then we will build something together. A future neither of us expected, but one we both deserve." And as they stood there, the weight of everything they had been through and everything that was still to come settled between them, they both knew that this was only the beginning. The bond they shared would be more than just a symbol. It would be a promise for the future. To be continued. The days following Daniel's final trial were filled with a strange mix of celebration and reflection. The Sci-Fi had never expected a human to be able to stand among them as an equal, but Daniel had proven them wrong. The bond between him and Zalvira had shifted from a mere ceremonial agreement to something genuine, something real. Yet, despite the victory, there was still a storm brewing on the horizon. Torek hadn't given up. Although he had lost the duel, the rivalry between him and Daniel wasn't over. The Sci-Fi warrior had been watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before Torek would try to challenge him again, either in public or in the shadows. Daniel and Salvira stood at the edge of the Sci-Fi city one evening, gazing out over the glowing fields that stretched beyond the stone walls. The stars above twinkled softly, but the air was thick with tension. "You've proven yourself," Salvira said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I know Torek won't stop. He'll try something again, and it won't be in the arena next time." Daniel sighed, his mind racing. He had expected this. He had expected the Sci-Fi to never truly accept him, to always see him as an outsider. But what was different now? What had changed was his resolve. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was fighting for a future, one with Salvira and the Sci-Fi. "Let him try," Daniel said, his voice firm. "I won't back down. I don't care what he does next. This bond we have, it means more than his hatred. It means more than anything he can throw at me." Salvira turned to him, her gaze soft but serious. "It's not just about you, Daniel. It's about the whole of our people. The Sci-Fi are proud, but that pride can sometimes blind us. We have to show them that this, us together, isn't something to be feared." Daniel nodded. He understood now more than ever. It wasn't just about one human and one alien warrior. This was about two cultures coming together, about breaking cycles of fear and misunderstanding. The Sci-Fi didn't trust him, didn't trust humans, but he was determined to change that. As the days passed, Salvira and Daniel worked together to build a new understanding within the Sci-Fi community. The bond between them was no longer just a personal connection. It was a symbol of unity, a bridge between two worlds. Daniel spent time with the elders, learning their ways, gaining their respect. He wasn't perfect, and he knew it, but he was doing his best to show them that humans had value, that they could be more than just outsiders. Still, despite their best efforts, Torek's influence didn't fade. One evening, Daniel and Salvira were summoned to the Council of Elders. The air was thick with tension as they entered the Grand Hall, the same hall where Daniel had earned his place in the trials. Now it was where he would have to face the next challenge, not of strength, but of will. Torek stood there, waiting for them. His cold gaze locked onto Daniel, and the room fell silent. "You've corrupted our people," Torek said, his voice low but sharp. "Your bond with her has led you astray. You have no place among us, human. You don't belong here." The room was still. The Sci-Fi around them exchanged wary glances. Daniel could feel the weight of the room's judgment pressing down on him, but he refused to let it crush him. "I'm not here to take your place, Torek," Daniel said, his voice strong. "I'm here to prove that we can work together, that we can break the cycle of fear and pride. I belong here because we belong here, together." Salvira stepped forward, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "This bond isn't just about Daniel and me. It's about the future of our people. We can't keep fighting the same battles over and over. It's time for the Sci-Fi to evolve, to accept change instead of fearing it." Torek's expression twisted in anger. "You think I'll just stand by and watch? You're wrong, Salvira. This isn't over." But despite his words, Daniel could see the doubt flicker in Torek's eyes. He wasn't so sure anymore. The entire council watched, and for the first time, they weren't looking at Daniel with hostility. They were looking at him with respect. And maybe, just maybe, with a hint of understanding. The battle was far from over, but Daniel knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was the fight of both worlds, the fight to change the future, and to break the cycle of fear and pride that had held the Sci-Fi and humanity back for so long. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone. The tension in the Council of Elders Hall was thick, almost suffocating. Daniel could feel the weight of the Sci-Fi warriors' stares pressing down on him. Even Torek, standing across from him with a scowl on his face, couldn't deny the fact that the atmosphere had changed. The Sci-Fi were watching him, not just as the human who had passed their trials, but as someone who had become a part of something much larger. The bond between him and Salvira wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the future of both their people. Daniel stood tall, his resolve unshaken, even though the odds were still stacked against him. Torek wasn't backing down, and the Council of Elders hadn't made any decisions yet. The Sci-Fi were a proud race, and change didn't come easy for them. But Daniel wasn't here to challenge their pride. He was here to show them that unity could be stronger than division. Salvira stood beside him, her posture confident, her eyes unwavering as they met the gazes of the council members. She had become his strength, just as he had become hers. Together, they were more than just a human and an alien. They were a symbol of what could happen when differences were put aside and a new path was forged. "You stand in our halls, claiming to be worthy of our respect," one of the older council members spoke, his voice deep and measured. "But respect is not freely given. It is earned, through blood, strength, and honor." Daniel's heart beat faster, but his voice remained steady. "I've earned my place through my actions, through my strength. But it's not just about that. It's about showing that we can be stronger together. Humans and Sci-Fi, working side by side." Salvira's voice cut through the silence. "You've all seen what Daniel is capable of. He's faced challenges no human has faced before, and he's done it with honor. He's proven his strength. Now it's time for the Sci-Fi to prove theirs." The council members exchanged wary glances. "Prove what?" Salvira, another elder asked. "That we can move beyond the fear of the unknown," Salvira replied firmly. "That we can build a future where both of our peoples thrive together, not in conflict, not in fear." Daniel's chest swelled with pride. She was speaking for both of them, for their future. And in that moment, Daniel realized that this fight, this struggle, wasn't just about proving he belonged. It was about creating something that could last. Torek stepped forward, his expression dark, his fists clenched. "This is a fool's dream," he sneered. "Humans are weak. They cannot stand with us. You are only putting our people at risk by allowing this union." Daniel's eyes locked onto Torek's, the tension between them crackling. "I'm not weak," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I'm not afraid of change. I'm not afraid to stand beside her and prove that together we're stronger. You're the one afraid of what comes next, Torek, afraid that your old ways will be challenged." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Daniel wasn't sure if the Sci-Fi would ever accept him as one of their own. But then, something shifted. The council members were no longer looking at him with suspicion or disdain. They were looking at him with something else, recognition. The elder who had spoken first stepped forward, his gaze heavy but thoughtful. "Perhaps you are right, Daniel. Perhaps we've been looking at this the wrong way." Salvira nodded, her eyes softening as she turned to face Daniel. "The future is not written yet. It is ours to create." The council members looked to one another, some nodding in agreement, others still unsure. But the change was happening, and the air around them had shifted. The cycle was breaking. Torek's eyes flashed with frustration, but he didn't speak. The council's decision was clear now, and despite his objections, Daniel knew that the Sci-Fi were beginning to accept the truth. The future was not about division, it was about unity. And he, with Salvira by his side, would be part of that future. As the council meeting came to an end, Daniel felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The path ahead would still be challenging, but it wasn't one he had to walk alone. He had earned his place, not just in the trials, but in their hearts. And as Salvira took his hand, her fingers warm in his, Daniel knew that the bond they shared wasn't just a symbol of victory. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Together, they were ready to face whatever the future held. Together, they would change the world.